The Return of the Indian by Reid Chapter 16. If you want to go back. Corporal Fickets marched his troops into the cupboard and lined them up in two ranks in the bottom of it. Their machine guns were lifted in. Fickets saluted Patrick. "Trainees, drawn up and ready, sir." "Thanks, Corporal. You've done a good job." "Thank you, sir." "Now, if you're going back where you came from, Fickets, don't forget how it feels to give orders. You'll be a sergeant in no time." Fickets permitted himself a grin. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." Omri told Little Bear to instruct his men, each to put a hand on the shoulder of the man beside or in front of him, so that the whole group was physically linked. "And they must all be linked to you, Little Bear, so you can take them back with you." Little Bear was in the paddock, fetching his pony. He had to get Bright Stars to give him a leg up. He bent over and put his hand on her black head. She gazed up at him, her eyes sparkling, this time with tears. She seemed to be begging him for something, but he shook his head. Suddenly she reached up, seized his hand, and pressed it to her cheek. Then she turned and ran into the tepee. As she entered, Boone's face appeared at the flap. "Hey! Psst! Injun!" Little Bear, who was riding toward the ramp, turned his head. "Give it to those Frenchies." "I give." Little Bear mounted, waved at the boys, rode down the ramp, and catching the reins up chest high, galloped to the cupboard. His pony jumped the bottom rim and swerved to a sudden stop to avoid the ranks of Indians. Little Bear barked a command. All the Indians put their hands on each other's shoulders. The nearest brave put his hand on the pony's rump. "Omri, shut door! Send!" ordered Little Bear. His face was burning with impatience. Omri gave himself a second to take in the group. The painted braves in their double row looked proud, ferocious, eager. They were obviously looking forward to the coming battle without a trace of fear. Their weaponry caught in the sun and glistened with readiness to do what it had been made to do. For a moment, Omri was swamped by doubts. It was like mailing death. Why should he help to kill people? But he was caught up in it now. "Go on," urged Patrick. "Send to them." "Wait, Fickets," said Omri. He picked up the little corporal, who was standing at attention just outside the cupboard, and set him by himself on the shelf. Then he shut the door firmly and turned the key. For a long moment they didn't breathe. Then Omri opened the door. His hand was shaking, and he jiggled the cupboard a bit more as he did it. 2 or 3 of the Indian figures, now plastic, fell over. It was like dominoes, each knocking down another until most of them lay tumbled across each other on the floor of the cupboard. Only Little Bear and Fickets and a couple more were still upright. The boys stared at the scene in dismay they couldn't control. Boone, who had crept to the edge of the seed tray, was leaning over to look, voiced their feeling. "Looks like a massacre, don't it?" "Don't be stupid, Boone!" Patrick almost shouted. "They're just plastic now. They fell over because Omri jogged this cupboard." "Sure," said Boone hastily. "Sure, I know that. I was just saying." "Well, don't! You ain't superstitious, are you?" "Of course not." Now there was a feeling of intense anticlimax. There seemed nothing they ought to do. It was getting chilly. They sat for a bit. But that became intolerable because of what they were all imagining. "Let's go in." Again, Patrick took the cupboard with its contents and the bag of weaponless British soldiers, and Omri took the seed tray. Bright Stars and Boone retreated into the tepee, just in case they met anyone on the way back upstairs, which was just as well, because as they passed Guion's bedroom on the first floor, the door opened and out he came. Omri and Patrick started guiltily. They couldn't help it. "What's all that?" Guion asked, not because he particularly wanted to know, but just out of idle curiosity. "Just some stuff we've been mucking about with," said Omri. He tried to push past, but Guion stood in his path. "Oh, it's that fantastic little house you made last year," said Guion. "And the leather tepee? Often wondered what had happened to that. Never seen one like it in the shops." Before they could do anything, he picked the tepee up to examine it. It was one of the worst moments of Omri's life. There was nothing he could do. There were Bright Stars and Boone crouching on the earth, exposed, discovered. Everything seemed frozen. Neither Patrick nor Omri could move. And the little people sat absolutely motionless. Omri's eyes were fastened on them helplessly. They were so obviously alive, so vulnerable. He waited, as a condemned man waits for the axe to fall on his neck, for Guion to notice them. Guion, however, was looking only at the tepee in his hands. "This really is a mini marvel," he said. "I love the paintings. Has Dad seen these?" He peered closer. "This little beaver and the porcupine. They look dead genuine, like those cave paintings we saw in France." And the way the poles are attached, it's really a work of art. With that, he plonked it carefully back on the earth, nearly knocking Boone's head off, and swung away down the stairs, singing a pop song at the top of his lungs. Patrick did a perfect imitation of Matron, spinning on his heel and falling in a mock faint on the landing. He lay there with the cupboard on his stomach and his eyes wide open and crossed. After a few seconds, he sat up. "Whew, that was close." He was still rooted to the spot. Boone was lying, half in, half out of the teepee on his back. His eyes looked crossed, too, quite genuinely. After a few moments, he wriggled all the way out and stood up, wiping the sweat off his face. "Geez, son," he complained. "Do you have to scare a fella like that? And the little lady, 'tain't right with her being the way she is, scaring her that-a-way. Might have brung something on." Omri put his face down and whispered through the flap, "Are you okay, Bright Stars?" There was no answer. Cautiously, Omri lifted the teepee again. Bright Stars was sitting perfectly still, her face down on her knees. "Bright Stars, answer me." Patrick had stood up and was peering anxiously over Omri's shoulder. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. Let's get her up to my room." They went up. Omri carried the seed tray very carefully. Inside, they locked the door and put the seed tray and the cupboard down on Omri's desk and turned on the lamp. Bright Stars stood up. Her face had a grayish look under the broom. "Sun come now," she said clearly. "I knew it," said Boone. "Get that old bat and the white headpiece back." Bright Stars need no one. Need water, knife. Omri bring, then leave. She signed that he should put the teepee back to cover her. "Are you sure, Bright Stars?" Little Bear said. Little Bear go fight. Bright Stars make sun. Go. Though very uneasy, Omri obeyed her. He fetched some boiled water, cleaned out the pond, and refilled it. Boone carried a bucket full of water to the flap of the teepee and laid his pocket knife beside it. "That'll cut the cord, you know," he confided. "Animals bite it through, but I guess the Indians is beyond that." After a short time, Bright Star's hand came out through the flap of the teepee and took the bucket and then the knife. After that, she fastened the flap firmly shut, and all was quiet. There seemed nothing to do but wait. Omri knew that with white people, anyway, the first baby often took a long time to be born. His mother had been half a day producing Adele, she'd told them. Perhaps with Indians it was different. Patrick was uneasy. If anything happened to her, Little Bear wouldn't ever forgive us. I wish he'd taken her back with him. Shouldn't we bring Matron? Bright Stars said not to. Matron's awfully bossy. Maybe she'd just upset her. Well, I think she'd be better off back in her own village. I wish I knew what was happening back there, Omri burst out. Yeah, if only we could get back somehow. They sat there, the three of them, the boys on chairs, Boone on the couch of rhododendron leaves where Little Bear had sat. Every now and then, Boone stood up and paced the ground outside the teepee. He kept biting hunks off a block of tobacco he had with him, and chewing at it and then spitting it out. He was obviously very worked up. Finally, he stopped. I should have gone with him, he said. I knew at the time I should have. That would have been crazy, Boone, said Patrick. Someone would have shot you just because you look different, and you're white. Maybe I could have stayed in the teepee and shot the Frenchies from cover. I could have done something. That Injun's my blood brother. His fight ought to be my fight. We need you here, Boone. What for? I ain't no use here. Well, said Omri, you can help with the baby. Boone's jaw dropped. Me? What do you take me for? Babies is women's business. And just at that moment, they heard a little cry from inside the teepee. It wasn't a baby's cry. In a flash, Boone was crouched to the flap. Let me in, lady. You can't be alone in there. I'll help you. I brung a dozen calves into the world and a foal once, and they're a lot bigger than a baby. I know what to do. There was a pause and a slight movement of the tent flap. Boone grinned a rather wobbly grin over his shoulders at the boys. You see, she trusts me, he said. Don't fret now, Little Bear. We'll be glad he made me his brother. You wait. The flap was loosened, and Boone started to crawl in, but just before he disappeared, he turned once more. I was thinking, he said, if you really wanted to go back and watch the battle. The boys looked at each other. They leaned forward incredulously to listen. Well, what I was wondering was, does it have to be the cupboard? Maybe it ain't the cupboard so much as that there fancy key. Did you ever try the key on something bigger, like that great big box, for instance? That we was all on before? Another little cry, more of a gasp, came from inside the tepee. So long, boys. Wish us luck, Boone said, and crawled the rest of the way, leaving both boys in a ferment of excitement at the possibilities of this amazing new idea. And that is the end of chapter 16.